I have spent enough years on the bench to understand that people rarely step into a courtroom carrying only the charges written against them. They arrive with decisions, pressure, poor timing, mistakes, and sometimes a quiet kind of suffering that changes the atmosphere before a single word is spoken. Most of what passes through my courtroom is routine: traffic citations, parking violations, expired paperwork. People who believe being late excuses everything. People who think an apology, if loud enough, cancels recklessness. People who assume rules exist for others, not themselves. I hear it all. I sort through it all. And after so many years, I can usually tell within moments what kind of case stands before me. But every now and then, there are exceptions. Cases that are not really about the paperwork at all. Cases that ask whether the person in authority can tell the difference between defiance and desperation, between someone exploiting the system and someone barely holding themselves together. That was the situation the morning Michael Chen entered my courtroom. He was 20 years old, a student at Providence College. Before he spoke, I could already see he carried more than unpaid tickets. His shirt was creased, his complexion pale, his eyes swollen in the unmistakable way grief marks the young, those who have not yet learned how to conceal it. He did not approach the podium like someone trying to argue his way out of trouble. He moved like each step required effort, as though exhaustion had replaced rest. The clerk handed me the file. 3 parking citations near the hospital area, 1 expired registration, with penalties. The total was just over $400. On paper, it was simple. The city expected payment. The defendant had violated the rules. End of matter. For someone careless, or for someone who believes judging is nothing more than processing paperwork, that would be the entire story. But I was not raised to think that way, and I did not spend decades on the bench to become nothing more than a clerk in a robe. So I asked him the question that matters at the start of any real hearing. What happened? He paused, swallowed, and looked down before explaining that he had been parking near Rhode Island Hospital because his father was in intensive care. He admitted he knew the parking was not permitted. He admitted he should have handled the citation sooner. Then he described his days: hospital, school, home, back again. No rest, no clarity, no ability to think beyond the next hour. Anyone who has sat beside a dying parent understands what that does to time. It fractures it. Days lose their structure. Life becomes a cycle of phone calls, test results, corridors, weak coffee, and the sound of footsteps outside a room where someone you love is fighting a battle they cannot win. I asked him how his father was doing now. I already sensed the answer, but in court, you do not assume. You ask. He lifted his eyes to meet mine and spoke 4 words that seemed to drain the room of air. He died 2 weeks ago. I have been a mother longer than I have held this position, longer than many people who appear before me have been alive. I know what it sounds like when a young person speaks through the last reserve of their strength and still sounds like they might collapse. There are moments when the law remains present, but something greater rises beside it. Not sentiment, but humanity. This was one of those moments, I asked when the funeral had taken place, the previous Friday. I asked his age again. 20 years old, standing in traffic court, trying to explain unpaid parking tickets while grieving a father who had just been buried. The absurdity of that reality says a great deal about bureaucracy when it loses perspective. I asked him to tell me about his father. There is no statute that requires that question. No section of any code instructs a judge to learn who a grieving son has lost. But the law exists to serve people, and if you want to understand justice, you must first understand the person before you. Michael told me his father came to this country from China at 18. No money, limited English, long hours in restaurant work, saving every dollar until he could open a small takeout place called Golden Dragon. Then came years of 16-hour days, 7 days a week, to sustain it and to give his family a better life. It was a story I had heard many times before, different details, same foundation, arrive with almost nothing. Build something through relentless effort so your child does not have to begin where you did. Michael explained that he was pre-med, hoping to become a doctor. He said watching the physicians who cared for his father changed him. They could not save him, but they treated him with dignity. And that mattered. Consider that for a moment. This young man stood before me with parking violations in his file and grief written across his face, yet his vision for the future was not bitterness or resentment. It was purpose. He wanted to become someone who could ease the suffering of others. That matters. Now let me be clear, because mercy is often misunderstood. A courtroom is not a place for therapy. Emotion is not a legal argument. People lie. People perform. They suddenly discover hardship, faith, or humility when facing consequences. I have seen enough to distinguish genuine pain from performance. Michael Chen was not performing. He was barely holding himself together. There is a difference. I reviewed the dates of the citations. December 15th, December 22nd, January 5th. Exactly the period when he was watching his father fade. I considered where those tickets were issued, near the hospital entrance, not near entertainment districts or leisure areas, but near the place he was trying to reach every day. By the strict letter of the law, the violations were valid. The signs had not disappeared. The regulations had not been suspended. But rules exist for reasons, and judges are tasked with understanding those reasons, not blindly enforcing ink on paper. We regulate parking for access, safety, and fairness. Those are valid objectives. But if a judge cannot distinguish between entitlement and necessity, between convenience and devotion, then that judge has misunderstood the role entirely. So I told him what I believed. He was not joyriding. He was not exploiting the system. He was trying to be present where a son should be in the final days of his father's life. Then I dismissed every ticket completely, not reduced, not postponed. Gone. For a moment, he stood still, as if the meaning of my words needed time to reach him. Grief slows comprehension. It is like hearing through water. Then he broke down. Not theatrically, but honestly. The kind of release that comes when someone expects another burden and instead is spared. I stepped down from the bench. I do not do that often. But sometimes remaining seated creates distance when what is needed is connection. I walked over and embraced him. I told him his father would be proud. I told him to pursue his dream. I told him not to let grief convince him that decency no longer exists. The entire courtroom rose to its feet, not out of obligation, but out of recognition. There is a difference between pity and recognition. Pity looks down. Recognition stands beside. When he left, the room felt altered. Proceedings continued as they must, but something had shifted. Voices were softer, attention sharper. For that morning, the courtroom remembered what it is meant to be. That night, I told my family about him, not for praise, but because some cases follow you home. They sit with you. They linger. Weeks later, my clerk informed me someone was waiting. No appointment, a young man who believed I would remember him. It was Michael. He looked steadier, though not untouched. Grief does not disappear so easily. He carried a white box. Inside were dumplings from his family's restaurant, his father's recipe. His mother was continuing the tradition and wanted me to have some. That gesture spoke volumes. A family enduring loss, still choosing gratitude. He told me something else had changed. He had been failing classes, unable to focus. But that moment in court reminded him that kindness still exists. It gave him enough strength to keep going. His professors had given him a chance to recover. He believed he would be okay. I told him he would be more than okay. I told him that one day, standing beside patients and their families, he would remember what it felt like to be seen, and that would make him a better doctor than any textbook. Months passed. Then came a letter. He had spent the summer volunteering in the oncology ward where his father had died. He returned to the place of his greatest pain to support others. He wrote that he would never forget. Later, he was accepted into medical school with a full scholarship. Years passed, and I learned he had opened a free clinic for immigrant families, naming it after his father's restaurant. Golden Dragon, that is what judgment can do. It does not end in the courtroom. It moves outward. It shapes what comes next. People often say rules are rules, but real responsibility lies in knowing when rigid enforcement defeats the very purpose of those rules. That is not weakness. That is judgment. Michael did not need punishment. He needed understanding. He needed space to grieve without being reduced to a bill. And because of that, the world gained a doctor who understands that compassion is not optional. It is essential. That case was never about parking tickets. It was about what the law becomes when it remembers people. And if I were faced with that decision again, I would make the same choice, without hesitation, because justice is not only about enforcing rules. It is about knowing when humanity must stand beside them and guide them.